Hello, welcome everyone. Welcome to another season of The Discourse, which is a streaming show produced by NYU Game Center, the game design uh, art program of New York University Tisch School of the Arts. And joining us today for The Discourse are full-time faculty Naomi Clark and Frank Lance, who will be dissecting the game industry news and rumblings that are happening today. So take it away, Naomi and Frank.
Thanks, Robert. Hi, Naomi.
Hi, Frank. Good to see you again. We haven't seen each other in person in a while, but it's always nice to have like a moment during the week when we can connect with each other, with all the people in chat. There's Danny Hawk in chat already. I'm so excited to see him too.
I like the fact that our entire friendship is mediated by gaming news.
Yeah, now it is.
That's a healthy relationship. When when all of our emotional contact is somehow threaded through, stories about Epic and
and hot takes and Stadia and Animal Crossing.
Yes.
Okay, so well, let's just dive right into it.
Before we do, can I compliment you on your background? I'm so used to you being a kind of Wizard of Oz figure with lots of very interesting and complex backgrounds, and now we're seeing this very raw, kind of authentic. I feel like it's a next level stylistic move by you. It's great.
I've moved on from backgrounds. I don't do backgrounds anymore. Now I just do like filters and stuff like that instead, right? I just have like a whole bunch of eyeballs or something like that.
You don't feel so good. Lie down for a minute.
All right. Yeah, hello, chat. And hello, thank you for coming back, our wonderful captioner, Mirabai, without whom
hello, Mirabai.
Certainly not do this. All right, let's actually talk about the news.
Yeah, let's jump in.
So first story, Ubisoft. And as you see in this picture here, their new mobile game, I think, in the Tom Clancy series is what this is from, right? So they've been doing these Tom Clancy games for a long time. Tom Clancy is like, I would consider a like reactionary warmonger tool. And so unsurprisingly, any Tom Clancy game is going to be about taking down terrorists or whatever, right? Like, oh, there's an imminent threat to the national security of the United States. And like, we have to violate everyone's civil liberties to stop this. But this time so this is a studio directed by Charlie Guillemot, who is Yves Guillemot's son, right? I think that's part of the story here.
Okay.
And he was, but just assigned to be the CEO of this particular studio making this mobile game. And they came out with a trailer for this. I think this was like a couple weeks ago now, right? And the villains in this group in this game are a shadowy organization that purports to promote egalitarianism and social justice and racial justice. They're called Umbra because they're shadowy or possibly dark in some manner, and they're
symbol kind of subtle symbolism that we've grown to love in video games. This kind of light touch. They're called the Umbra. It's a shadowy organization. Maybe you missed that part. It's shadowy.
Well,
go ahead.
Get away with that if most people have no idea what Umbra means, right? Oh, it's the Latin word. It's probably the Greek word for shadow.
Who knows what it is?
Yeah, but the important thing is that the narrative here is that they're tricking protesters into thinking that they're fighting for a good cause, when really this shadowy organization is trying to just destabilize and like create anarchy and bring down the government and I don't know, kill millions of people somehow, right? And so you have to take your crack team of formerly incarcerated mercenaries to take down these bad guys, and then they got a huge backlash to this. I think primarily the backlash was focused on the fist symbol, right, which a lot of people associate with Black Power. And for good reason, because it sort of was like the main, that's what I think it's as mostly associated with. Although people are pointing out, it's been used by like various leftist organizations for years, but they are all these black fists. And so first they said, oh, we'll get rid of the black fists. I don't know who decided on that, which sort of beside the point. This whole narrative is a little bit like an edgy guy thought that like that an Antifa super soldier joke was like really funny to like base a game around.
Yeah.
And now they're like trying to make up for it by donating a bunch of money to the NAACP.
Yeah. Maybe what they could do is just remove the plot from this game. Do you think anyone would care if that, like, why don't we just stop trying to put a story of any kind in this game, and instead you have a series of missions where you shoot things, I guess. And it's a mobile game, so I assume you tap on things to shoot them or whatever.
Right.
You have a squad. This one reminds me a little bit of Og's Lives Matter. Do you remember this?
Yeah,
Og's Live Matters. Now that wasn't Ubisoft, but it was. And I'm not trying to make this into a Canada thing, but wasn't that also, that was like Eidos, Montreal?
Yeah, you're right. It was Eidos, Montreal.
And in both cases, my interpretation of this is actually, I don't know, I'm guessing here, who the hell knows? But it's not that there's like some invidious attempt to like do a reactionary message and get it across, but that rather it's like an attempt to do something cool. Right? It's like, well, let's do something that actually engages with contemporary politics in an interesting way. Like video games are, I think in some ways this is maybe people responding to the urge, that we're all expressing, that video games engage with political issues and just stumbling and fumbling and doing it in a really kind of shallow way that is not aware of the complexity of these issues, and instead is just kind of blundering through. You know what I mean? Like that's kind of my read.
Yeah, I mean, I think at the very least, it strikes me as clueless. I can kind of buy that this Og's Live Matters one was just like a total absence of ever asking anybody who might actually have any reason to care about Black Lives Matter. Like, hey, is this a good idea? And just not having anyone on the team who could like give an informed opinion on that. But this new one is a little bit more sinister to me because it's kind of taking a side on this question, which has inflamed politics in the United States, right? Like, is Antifa a terrorist organization, right? That's like a hot political question in the U.S. because the president of this country is like wants to declare a certain segment of protesters to be a terrorist organization, right? People who are doing direct actions. And other people are like, wait, they're not actually terrorists. And then this game is like, but what if they were? What if there was a science fiction where they were terrorists?
Yeah, I mean, it's a good question, right? I mean, there's different ways to view this. I always assume that, maybe I'm giving too much the benefit of the doubt, but I don't. I assume that there's a lot of people working on this game, and there isn't a kind of like unified distrust of the kind of protest movement that's happening globally around this, but there rather is an attempt to kind of like express a kind of cynicism about organizations in general. It's like, oh, everything is this convoluted, multi-layered maze of people saying one thing and meaning another. And wouldn't that be kind of a sophisticated take on this whole thing? When in reality, it's just like a bumbling, idiotic take that you wouldn't recognize the meaning of this symbol and its importance in this contemporary protest movement that's really, happening right now and is very vital and people care very much about. And instead you would try to do this weird take on it. It just seems like a huge blunder.
Right. I mean, I think that at the very least, it's just pure edgelording, right? Like that would be the really generous thing to say, is that you're just being like, oh, you know what? All organizations are bad, man. Like that kind of. I think you've connected that to this idea, like a nihilistic approach to just saying, oh, you know what? Nothing really matters. All these people are trying to trick you, kind of refusenik attitude. But Yeah, and then maybe it's something more sinister than that. Like, it's hard to say, but it's at the very least a sort of centrist edgelord.
And it's sort of like the downside of encouraging game developers to engage with these issues more is that when they do, they're terrible at it.
Right. Well, that's what I thought a lot about this here, because I've spent, I don't know, when I started ranting about this at GDC in like 2012 or something, right? Like, games ought to be more political. We ought to take our ability to impact popular culture seriously, just like, Hollywood really started to in earlier decades. And and I kind of thought about back then, I was like, well, this is bound to happen. Like, if you want people to engage in politics, some people are going to do so in like really stupid ways, or in like ways that are just overtly oppressive or racist or right wing.
Yeah.
And I kind of feel like, no, I want this type of thing to happen, in part so that there will be more public conversation about this. And I know people are really concerned about, like, will this mobile game coming out from Ubisoft actually demonize Black Lives Matter and Antifa? And I don't think it's that simple, right? I think that's already happening anyway, in like much more scary ways, and via the news media. And I don't know. I think we ought to be just slugging it out in games and be like, yeah, here's my politics in my game. And then someone else is like, your politics are full of shit. And I don't know, that honestly is the kind of world that I would prefer to a bland, like, no, there's no politics here at all kind of thing, which sometimes some of the large game companies try to evince that, right? Like, there's nothing political here in any way. But I feel like controversies like this are going to make them retreat more towards that and be like, The Division isn't a political game. What are you talking about?
Well, if I'm given the choice between the Tom Clancy mobile game that we all used to know and love, the one that was just generic, kind of reactionary status quo bullshit, and this version of the Tom Clancy mobile game, which has a perhaps a weird, kind of right wing weird message in it. It's really a hard choice. I wouldn't know, which to choose. They're both, so terrible looking.
Yeah, so they're all crappy games.
Yeah.
Especially the mobile version, which is mostly going to be about like leveling up your squad and like buying some additional skins for them, right? But
it comes down. Thumbs down on this one.
Yeah, but this one's definitely the contradictions are heightened here, which I have to wonder about, like, how that affects the overall conversation.
Yeah.
Let's go on to the next one.
All right. The people have spoken, and they want us to talk about Blazeball. Can we jump over to the Blaze? First of all, is it Blazeball or Blazeball? Was just someone explain that to me? I'm sorry.
I originally thought it was Blazeball.
Is it?
Blazeball, but okay. I've come around, and what I now believe is that it's Blazeball. Blaze, like blaze, like get blazed and play ball. Mm-hmm. That's my interpretation now.
It's a family show, Naomi, so maybe you want to tap the brakes, but
that could mean any number of things.
now you haven't played Blazeball. Have you?
No, I haven't. I don't believe. Well, it depends on what you mean by playing Blazeball. I support Blazeball. The players of Blazeball are the people who actually play Blazeball. Okay, right. Everyone else is betting on games, and I don't believe in that. I think it's. I actually frown on Blazeball as a practice. That's my opinion.
You don't like betting?
No, I believe that it's a real ethical and moral problem to be betting on Blazeball games. I think it's been made clear by the giant things like the giant peanut appearing in the sky, various levels of blasphemy that have been incurred, that this is a game that doesn't want to be bet on, and players are choosing to ignore that. That's my take. So I have a Blazeball account. I observe games. I don't engage in idolatry. That's the latest popular thing in Blazeball, and I don't bet on games. Right? Yeah.
Right. So I also don't play Blaseball, but it's not for any principled reason. I just haven't gotten around to it yet. I am aware of the story of Blaseball. I know that it's the game of the summer. The team that made this game, they had a very polished, sort of beautiful looking, high production value 3D game called Where Cards Fall. I think it was part of the Apple Arcade. And so really interesting, talented group of game developers. Their follow-up title that I think they were pitching, they were having trouble getting traction on it. And so instead, they're like, why don't we do something really fast and janky and high concept and weird and just quickly get something out there? And so they did, and it turned out to be spectacular. And high concept and weird and just quickly get something out there. And so they did,
Yeah.
and it turned out to be spectacular. So
yeah,
I don't, yeah.
I think
What can we say about Blaseball? It's great. 2 thumbs up.
What else is there to say about baseball? Robert, you play and bet on Blaseball more than either of us. I feel like you were bound to have an opinion here.
Yeah, I mean, I played the first few seasons. I'm a Millennials fan. I'm pledged to the New York Millennials team. Yeah, I'm getting into it. I think I liked the fantasy of being into sports. That's kind of what I was into. But now I think I'm overwhelmed a little bit by how big the community is and how much of playing Blaseball is about the fan culture now. And it's hard to like keep up with the fan culture now. So I've kind of fallen off the wagon a little bit, unfortunately.
Yeah, it's interesting. The alchemy that goes into creating something like Blaseball, I think what was the clever stroke, right, is that it's both sports and it's like a bunch of, honestly, gamer nonsense. Mostly of the kind of elder gods variety. That's what I sense a lot of in here. And that kind of works for like a certain slice of people, right? It's both ironic and sincere at the same time. So it's like hitting the right notes. What I think is most interesting about Blaseball, here's my opinion will get serious for a second and won't just be like jokes about the angering the peanut or whatever, is that it's taking the process of patching and updating a game and the kinds of things that you would normally communicate with players about, right? And maybe this is something that's a little bit influenced by recent games like Fortnite. They're continuing to balance and add features to this game, but they're doing so in a way that has an absurdist story attached to it, which has like an interestingly antagonistic attitude towards players, which is actually a reflection of how all reasonable game developers feel about the players of their like online multiplayer games. So I think, those of you who are watching the stream who were NYU Game Center students, you were probably all subjected to the ecosystem game at some point where you had to like live balance a multiplayer game that was just played over the course of a couple hours in the classroom. And watching the Blaseball evolved is a little bit like watching that for me. It has like a lot of similarities, and and all of the magic touches here are all about like making theatrical all of these changes to a fantasy baseball game that has a bunch of extra rules that game designers would add to fantasy baseball if there were no realism restrictions. That's more or less my analysis of Blaseball. I don't know. Have you gleaned anything else, Frank, from observing this phenomenon?
In regular sports, you take a bunch of activity which has a ton of noise in it, and you carve it up into a narrative, right? So sports as entertainment, a lot of it is basically almost taking random numbers and organizing them into a kind of meaning, which is like a collaborative narrative. So this team has momentum. This team is on the comeback. This team is searching for, like, these are all just different ways of saying, like, certain teams have won and certain teams have lost, but we try to like frame it as a story. And so Blazeball is interesting because it's making that explicit, right? You're taking this kind of random numbers and in the big collaborative storytelling exercise, we carve meaning out of them. So I think that to me is what is most interesting about it. Should we talk about this beautiful Russian game? Do you want to
let's
the Militsioner?
Let's jump over that. I just want to make a note for Flan that you haven't been punished for betting yet, but just think about it. Use your own moral intuitions, Flan. You can figure out like what actually is right and wrong when it comes to Blazeball. Okay, yeah, let's talk about Militsioner. I think that's I've lost my high school Russian. I would love it if somebody knew how to pronounce this game correctly.
I'm just going to say it's like pensioner, but with millet instead of pen. So it's Militsioner.
Militsioner. So this is a game about a giant policeman who watches you and who may or may not be benevolent. And the Russian news media has pegged it as being a problematic game because it might be anti-Russian. And I think, interestingly, this goes back into the history of this figure, the Militsioner, in previous art, right? Like it started off as a character who was like a noble policeman in stories and like maybe semi-propagandistic stories from many having ago. And then by the time the 80s got around, there were people who had grown up with the story and had mixed feelings about it. And were like, maybe having this kindly policeman who's like ensuring everyone's safety is a little creepy. And so now I think it's mostly because of that that enhancing that creepiness by having the policeman be giant inside of a video game is now just being accused of being like, hey, are you perpetuating this idea that the police state is not your friend through this game?
Yeah, I think in the 80s and 90s this figure had been appropriated by artists and avant-garde cultural figures as a kind of ironic take on authority and discipline, and so it was just kind of floating around as a political signifier. But I honestly think that this entire thing is a result of the image. If we could scroll down and just look at, there's a screenshot of this game that sort of like, that one over on the right in the column. If you go up a little bit and look on the right side of the page. Okay, so that, I don't know if we can get a bigger version of that picture. It's just gorgeous. Like there is something, I guess, no, they're not. Yeah, I don't know. It's such a striking image. It's beautiful. You're wandering through this environment, and then in the distance, this colossal figure. Yeah, there it is. It's quite striking and beautiful. It's a little bit like the girl from Devs in the landscape. It has a little bit of that vibe, and I think it just shows you that, because if you listen to the developers talking about the meaning of this thing, I don't think they really even know. I think it's almost like this is how art works, right? I mean, they're aware of the fact that there's power in this image. They know that it kind of connects with political ideas, and but it's not like they had like a really clear, kind of decisive interpretation that they're trying to express. They talked about how originally this part of the game was a big fish, and it was like a fish with a city on it, and then it was like a big person, and then they made it this cop figure, and then at a certain point, I think it just like solidified as being what this game is about, and now there's a kind of battle for what it means.
Yeah, exactly. I think they're picking up on things that are already in the consciousness, the popular imagination of their milieu, because the developers are Russian, right? And so this idea of the omnipresent cop who's like watching your every move, I think it's not unfamiliar to anybody who's read like a fair amount of like Eastern Bloc literature, I think. So I don't know. It's in the news because some news media have taken objection to it. But I think that the idea that there's this giant figure observing you, that I think is the best thing about this game.
Yeah.
This is something that, and that the way they talk about it in this article, that the developers, Tall Boys, they have not quite figured out yet, like, what is going to happen with this giant figure. Like he could crush you, but he's not crushing you because his job is to like watch over you, right? Like this, it's something I think that video games are kind of good at, this type of thing. Also, just the ability to create this particular sort of surreal feeling that's been expressed in like the short stories and things like that before, but now you can kind of instantiate it, right? I don't know. I'm excited.
It's a good demonstration of the circuitous process of game design, of trying things and not really being sure necessarily where you're going, and then all of a sudden putting a thing in your game that has some power to like entrance you, to like it's clear that this means something, and then trying to build the rest of the game around it to make sense of it, to explore it. And they're kind of scrambling to now make a game that can justify this central image that they've just stumbled on, discovered, right? It's really beautiful, and I'm excited to see where they go with this game.
Agreed.
Yeah.
Let's where should we jump to next?
We have like
Michael
Thompson
more
tweet?
lengthy.
Do you want to look at this Michael Thompson?
Yeah, let's
tweet?
look at
Michael
that.
Thompson was nice enough. First of all, love Michael Thompson. One of my favorite writers in games. Michael Thompson's famous for hating Dark Souls, and has just written beautifully about the kind of, in a very honest way, about the tormented feeling that we often have towards games that have us in their grip, right? So he's played a lot of this game. He's not sure what he thinks about it, and he's like really engaging with it on a deep level. He's just a really smart guy and a smart writer. So anyway, when we asked for topics and suggestions for what to talk about, he suggested this, and so this thread, I was trying to understand what he's going. So the question was like, what do boom industries have to do to hold the interests of institutional investors long after the boom is over? How do players adapt to those changes by trying to naturalize them into their own microcultures? And if you scroll up, this was in response to someone else saying, hey, talk about Michael Thompson. Hey, would love to hear some discussion of Michael Thompson's ideas that video games are fading as a hegemonic form of massively distributed digital games. I can't find the tweet, but I'm sure he can recall it. I don't recall what I said, but it's something like, hey, the boom is over. What are these capitalists going to do to sort of maintain interest now that video games are over as a thing? And I'm like, and my response was like, really? Is that what's happening? Like, I thought video games were booming, and he's saying, no, the boom is over. I thought they were booming even more than ever. So he was saying, no, kind of numbers are down. And I guess his point is that the numbers are being juggled because we're incorporating, if you go down, I was like, is the boom over? And he was like, yeah, the number of consoles this generation is down, and the overall math would look worse if we weren't doing this thing of aggregating numbers from like mobile, I guess. So we're bundling mobile and PC games with console sales to make it look like that is still going up, when in reality, console sales are going down. So go ahead. Why don't you help me understand what Michael is saying? Do we agree with this?
So I think it's funny because he's not thinking about video games in the same way that we do. Over here, in the game center, and I don't know, the way that we tell students about games, we're like, oh, video games are just like one subset of like all sorts of games, and like everything that you can imagine being video games kind of fits in within the wide embrace of what we would consider to be video games, right? So we would never say something like, well, PC and mobile games aren't really what video games, right? That when he's thinking about the industry, he's saying, you can't really consider PC games and mobile games to be the same thing because those overlap with so many other kinds of apps and software. And we'd be like, huh? Right to that, right? But what he's really talking about, I think, is a cultural moment that was fueled in part by the rise of console games I don't know, between the late 80s and like the early 2010s, right? Or from the let's say from the NES to the PlayStation 3, something like that. Mm-hmm. Like that might be the huge golden age of consoles. And that there were certain things that, like, if that had never happened, that games would have a different role in the public imagination. Like, we might not have gotten as many big giant blockbusters with billboards out in public being like, buy the latest Rockstar game or whatever, right? That there's a sort of artifact and like, oh, there are these video game machines that you have to go and buy your kid for Christmas, right? Because it's a dedicated machine that's you just use to play video games in your home. So for us, it might not seem like as big of a deal, because we're like, well, games existed before that and they exist after that, right? But
Alexander in the chat is making a similar point, saying that he thinks this is a result of Michael looking at one particular metric, which is console sales, and sort of ignoring the bigger and kind of more diverse industry overall. But I actually don't even understand this in terms of console sales. I mean,
console sales are, so he's right about console sales.
But wasn't the Switch like a huge success?
Relative to the Switch was a huge success relative to Nintendo, which has been a smaller and smaller part of.
Okay, so Nintendo had already been dipping, and then they had like a comeback.
Yeah,
the Switch,
we have to remember, among those of us who love games, right? We might be really excited that, like, I don't know, new flight simulator is coming out, and that's like, going to be primarily like a, Windows release or something. But for in the bigger picture, if you look at, I don't know, overall numbers, to the extent that stuff matters, a lot of stuff that the games world cares about is a tiny drop in the bucket, right? So Nintendo is beloved by fans, but is a small piece of the overall games business. So I think when Michael Thompson is looking at like the cultural impact of games, he's probably thinking about, the overall decline of how many people are buying consoles, and how many people are buying console games, and are there going to be these huge blockbuster releases? It's like, is the Hollywood model of games continuing? I kind of hope it's over, honestly. And this is like, I'm sure Robert kind of agrees with me, right, Robert? It's like, what if this stuff died and we can't wait for it to die? But because we are the smaller microorganisms running around on the edges of this picture, right? We're like,
on the corpse of the mainstream game industry. Is that what you're suggesting?
Yeah, exactly. I mean, there are these gigantic fish swimming in the ocean, and occasionally they die, and we're like, okay, cool. There's more stuff for us to eat out there.
We call that whale fall, and it's a time for feasting and celebration.
Right. So, I think from Thompson's point of view, it's different, right? It's like maybe the roles of games will change, but I can tell you though. So it's absolutely true that for the business industry analyst perspective, there has been like a surreptitious, not really that surreptitious, everybody knows it's happening, shuffling of chairs on the deck to be like, actually, all the growth is over here in mobile, which is true. Yeah. Right.
Michael Thompson just hates mobile. He's a gamer and he hates mobile games. And
right.
I think that's really
he wants to have another. Yeah, he wants another like giant blockbuster epic, but
he'll get it.
Yeah,
it's
so
fine. Relax, Michael. It's going to be fine. Uncharted.
Right. It's just not as many people are going to play it. It's all okay.
You pick. What's your choice?
Oh boy, my pick. I want to talk about Craftopia. Let's go to Craftopia. I think that was one of our
Bennett suggested we chat about Craftopia.
We asked, and we're actually we want to ask. Yeah, it's so this is something new for the discourse this semester. We're crowdsourcing links, so if any of you want to contribute ideas for like over the next week of stuff you want us to talk about, you absolutely can by tweeting at us on Twitter. So Craftopia. This is funny because I have the dual reaction to this that I think a lot of people targeted by this game have, which is like, wow, this has like a lot of different game genres in it that I feel very fond of in not even in like a critical analytical way, but I'm like, oh, this is so pleasant. I love games where you arrange factories and where you farm and where you pet animals and you tame animals and where you wander around a beautiful world. And so I have to admire the gumption of these devs. They're like saying like their whole design ethos is we're combining all the stuff we like into one game. Which like who doesn't want to do that, right? But then the almost immediate reaction, you can see this in everywhere there are comments about this game. People are like, oh, how this is never going to work. It's going to be a whole bunch of thin systems kind of pasted onto each other, and none of them are going to be that good. And then there are other people who are like getting invested as fans. This is an early access game, by the way, right? So
wait, hold on a second. A video game that's just a collection of thin systems and none of them are really that interesting and they're just kind of thrown together. I've never heard of such a thing. That's absurd.
It's fascinating that exists as a critique out in the player sphere these days, right? Because I don't think it wouldn't have been able to in decades past. But now people are kind of wary of this because sometimes when people see games like this, and I think, there are a bunch of, in the crowdsourced era and the early access era, I think a lot of players have been through this multiple times, right? Like where they're like, oh my gosh, this game has everything I ever wanted. And then they imagine what it is. And then of course it's not exactly what they imagine, right?
Yeah,
and so
but that's sort of like, that's Second Life is a little bit of that. And it's also like
No Man's Sky was initially like that.
Yeah, and then there's also the future game with spaceships in it you can buy for thousands of dollars, and it hasn't come out yet.
Right.
Ever,
the David Braben game.
Example. Yeah. This is, Charles Pratt, Game Center faculty Charles Pratt, has this theory called the crack up, right? And Charles's theory is that video games from 2 decades ago had to be all things to all people because you got one of them a year. You got one at Christmas. And so 20 years ago, a video game had to be this, there's this idea of the Gesamtkunstwerk, right? The total theater. It had to have everything. Wagnerian opera is an example of this in culture. It had to have sets, beautiful architecture, costumes, has wonderful fashion in it. It's got acting and dramatic characters killing each other. It's got singing, and so because you only get one opera a year, it has to have everything, right? So you only get one video game. It's got to be Final Fantasy VII, right? It's got to have combat, which is like a tactical system that has strategic depth. It also has to have a story with characters, and then there's a world you explore. And then recently, we've moved away from that because there isn't just one game a year. Instead of there's one game every 5 seconds, right? And so this has opened the games up to be things, for there to be things like esports. So instead of having crappy combat in your exploration and storytelling game, you just have games that are pure about a deep combat as a system, right? A deep strategic system, right? Those are entire genre. And then you have games at the same time, you have these storytelling games that don't feel like they also have to have strategic systems in them, right? They're just in like a deep dive into character and story. And then you have world building and crafting in those games. So and there's some, I think, interesting like leverage that this theory of the crack up gives. But I think what we're seeing with Craftopia is that, like all theories, it's just partial, right? There's also at the same time this recommitment, which is partly inspired by nostalgia, I think, and partly inspired by the democratization of the tools. Now that it's easier to build these things, smaller teams one of the things they can choose to do is, rather than pursuing one of these different aesthetics, is to go back and revisit the idea of the Gesamtkunstwerk, the total theater, the game that has everything in it. And we're just going to keep doing that too. So it's sort of like everything. It keeps going. Like we have both the crack up and the continuation of and that's just like, that's video games.
Yeah, and from the point of view of sort of maximizing the possibilities, that's wonderful, right? And I don't know, I think the energy around this is so interesting because it automatically attracts supporters who are like, I want to believe in this. I want to believe it can be awesome. And then skeptics, right? And so that creates this little nexus of like, oh my gosh, what is this game going to end up being? And of course, like everybody knows it's not going to end up being 100% on all of these meters, right? In fact, it's going to be weird and janky in some ways. But the thing I like most about this, I think it's just people in chat are pointing out, is that already you can see the weird seams in this, because so much of this game is about pouring cows into lava with a conveyor belt, and all the animals, they don't have animations yet. This is all early access, but it's like, that's not the point. The aesthetic here is now like, see how much stuff we can cram into it, and I think that's beautiful in its own way. Yeah.
2 thumbs, moderately.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah, sure. And this is a playable game. You can play it right now, by the way. So go check it out. Okay, you pick the next one then.
Okay. Should we talk about? I don't want to talk about Crusader Kings. It makes me tired just thinking about it. We could talk about the Sims reality show. There's going to be a reality game show based on the Sims.
That's great. That's so wholesome. In some ways, I was gladdened to hear about it. You know, The Sims, of course, it feels like it's been around forever now, right? It's still one of the most popular games of all times. And if there were any fan community who I'd say, yeah, sure, you guys deserve to like have your own reality show based around you, this is really not a bad choice. Like, how lovely that this has happened. So what this show is, it's actually in the model of things like Project Runway, or a cooking reality show, where the contestants are people from the Sims creator community, right? They're people who have a lot of fan followers already, who are established creators, who make a whole bunch of fan created content for the Sims games. And those people, they all know each other already, I think, which is another fascinating thing that doesn't usually happen in reality TV shows. And they're brought on and given different challenges, like create 2 rival families who are neighbors and like tell a drama with it. And it's a storytelling reality show. They're pitting the storytelling ability of these creators against each other, and the medium is The Sims.
That's and good. It seems like a good idea for a show.
Yeah,
this is who the host is and who the judges are. To me, it's all about the host and the judges, right? That's what's going to determine whether the show is. Do you know? Have they said?
I think it says somewhere in that article. It's somebody who has done other shows for TBS, I think, where there are two hosts, as there so often are. But I've heard a lot of ideas and actual examples of like TV shows around video games before, and I so rarely am like, oh yeah, that's a great idea, that's so lovely, and this is so out of the blue, shockingly positive. Let's see if we can find the host here.
It's somebody named Owen.
Yeah, they have producers from like The Amazing Race, X on the Beach, things like that. So the producers are people who've done it before. But let's see. Yeah, where is the host? Oh yeah, no, it is. It's Rayvon Owen. I do not know Rayvon Owen, but the top of the story has a whole spiel about his own relationship to The Sims, which is that he used to use The Sims to enact his gay fantasies, but simultaneously hide them from his mother. Right. And that's a kind of what these are. And that's the other interesting thing about this, is that they're saying some of these challenges that the contestants are going to do are going to be things that draw on their own life experiences. So they're asking them to kind of reflect about like issues and racial discrimination, or how their sexuality is like played into their creative work, which is also, I don't know, that happens a lot in like these fashion shows, right? They're like, okay, how does your background and your own biographical story like play into your work? But you so rarely see that in any context with video games, right? Like outside of autobiographical games and those of us who are like interested in that, but like to have that stuff on TBS using games as a medium, is a kind of a really lovely idea. Yeah.
And
so
in general, TV game shows, I think, are a very under theorized domain of game design. Do you have any favorite TV game shows, Naomi? You watch The Genius? Have you seen the Korean show, The Genius?
Yeah, I really like The Genius. I love Golden Balls. You know, I've always loved those types of.
Kind of a one note show, Golden Balls, though, right? It's like,
it is a bit of a one note show,
but you're like, it's just that dilemma over and over again. I like a little more texture. Have you seen?
Right, but like,
there's a great one.
Society games, like the Korean ones that are all kind of like, I don't know, they're a bit game theory.
Right? The Genius is over the top with that stuff, and I love it.
Yeah.
Then there's also the kind of the British tradition of the panel show, which there's some super good ones. Richard Osman's House of Games is the one that we're currently in love with, and it is a smorgasbord of game design. Is lots and lots of different little formats that are put together. Highly recommended. Go check that one out.
Nice. Yeah, I'll have to do that behind on my game.
Let's move on and touch on one of these other topics. What do you think? It's your turn. Ball's in your court.
Yeah, you want to talk about Dia Lucina's review of Tell Me Why on Vice?
Yeah,
we should bring that one up.
The follow-up to the game called...
Right. This is, it's Don't Nod, Life is Strange. That's the one they're best known for. And Life is Strange, I don't know, very beloved among a lot of people, especially, I think, you know, the more and more of our undergrad students, but also MFA students at the Game Center have cited Life is Strange as like a pretty important influence on, like, you know, why they wanted to make games or a game that they think is interesting. I mean, around the time
beloved by you? Beloved by you, Naomi?
Beloved by me, not so much. I mean, I think it has its flaws. You know, it maybe hit me at the wrong point in my appreciation of games in general.
Yeah.
But, you know, it's like, this is a studio that makes a sincere attempt to try and represent people and issues in their games. And I think that this review really points out the limitations of doing that in a sincere, but ultimately safe and deliberately toothless way. And when I say deliberately toothless, I mean, we don't want to upset anybody. We just want to include some trans people and some indigenous people in our game, but we don't want anyone to get upset by that. Right. That's kind of the tone that I'm sensing from what Dia Lucina, who is herself a trans indigenous author, is talking about this game. So again, this is something that I think about, like when we encourage game developers in the game industry to be like, get more political, tackle like real issues and stories. This is also something that's going to happen, right? That there's going to be something that checks the correct boxes, checks all the boxes,
right?
And then it's sort of like, well, do you have anything actually that's very compelling and moving to say that like really gets you right here? And if you don't, then like, congratulations for checking all the boxes. That means there's less wrong with your game than in other games. But this review made it clear that at least for Dia Lucina, there wasn't that much that was right about this game, that it all felt like handled with kid gloves really carefully. So it's a really difficult issue.
It's not like video games were really good at telling stories, but they were just avoiding dealing with political issues. It's like video games were always super, like in general, like some of them are really good at telling stories, right? But in general, video games always struggled, you know, with storytelling, and there was a kind of awkwardness and a stiffness to it, and it was part of their charm. In fact, was the strangeness, the inability, the clumsy quality of how video games told stories. It kind of became, like, if we look at Death Stranding, you know, we talked about Death Stranding, we talked about Kojima and his status as a storyteller, which is, I think, wrapped up in the awkwardness, the kind of brokenness. So it's not like we had this powerful, fluent narrative engine, and then we just needed to like move it over to these other more, you know, contemporary and relevant topics. It's like we're just now seeing video games, which have always struggled, you know, with how they handle characters and stories, struggling to handle characters and stories that are more relevant and topical and political.
Well, it's interesting because I think of the Don't Nod House style as being extremely conservative when it comes to game design and narrative design, right? They're basically doing almost everything tried and true, very straightforward. There's no surprises here when it comes to like game mechanics, or even like, I don't know, something like the narrative sleight of hand that happens in Disco Elysium, where you have like 18 different voices inside of somebody's head, right? Like not even that kind of like interesting new idea. Don't Nod is focused almost exclusively on, let's tell a good story with whatever game design tricks have already been established by other people, right? So they're almost like the Blizzard of narrative design.
There you go. That's a really good, great analogy. Yeah.
Right. But then I think hand in hand with that kind of design conservatism, where you're like, okay, let's just try and make good quality and not worry about doing something wacky and new that might completely break, right? Then I think it goes with this type of playing it safe too, where they're like, well, we want to have a story about a trans character, but it's definitely going to be a trans guy. And also there's going to be trauma that's experienced, but we're not going to like zoom in too close on that because somebody might get upset. And like these characters are all basically good. Nobody's like a horrible, flawed individual. I don't know. I think that this is, I think maybe giving into a little bit too much of, I don't know, trying to make sure that nobody gets upset is not a great recipe for making something that's memorable or hard-hitting. And I think in chat, FinJC is saying, that this is what's called the representation, or like, I can't remember if Lucina coined that term or whatever, but she sometimes says things like, oh, praise be to the representation, right? Like, it's like, at least having that box checked off is, like that's the minimum bar. And of course we have to like genuflect a little bit to that and be like, yes, that's important.
It's not nothing.
It's not nothing. And if it wasn't there, we'd be like, gross, not another Nolan North led game or whatever, right? But it's also not enough.
It's not an all or nothing situation. It's not like these are things that are problems that we just fix and then we're done. Like, this is like, how do games engage with the world and with issues of being a human and having identity and being a political figure in history? Like that's just an ongoing problem. It doesn't get fixed. It doesn't get easier. It's just a constant, ongoing process. So this is just a step.
Exactly.
Yeah.
And I have to say, I never had high hopes for this game because they made a huge press release big deal out of this character who you see on the screen here, that he's a trans guy. And when they announced this in the press, they did it in conjunction with GLAAD, the Gay and Lesbian Alliance Against Defamation, which is kind of the most cynical PR wing of like LGBTQ diversity that exists anywhere on the planet. And I don't know, it just, for me, whenever those types of folks get involved, it's going to be 80% hype and PR optics and 20% substance. So there's still some substance there, no doubt about it. And I'm sure there's a lot of creative work went into this game, but the approach to it, I was like, okay, there's definitely somebody who was like, this will earn us a lot of clicks and engagements. Like, got their hands deep into this thing. Yeah. That's just my sense.
When I played Life is Strange, but I played it at the same time that I played Until Dawn, and I loved Until Dawn. And Life is Strange, I just kind of bounced off of. I was like, I get it. It's kind of cute, but I found it really tedious and boring. Whereas Until Dawn, which is in many ways a much less sophisticated game, right? It's a kind of a pulp narrative. It's like this horror story, mystery narrative, but both have these very high production values that are all lavished on the characters, on interaction, conversation, faces. And I just like, for some reason, I loved Until Dawn. It's very pulp. It's very kind of garbage culture, but it just kind of grabbed me, and I really enjoyed it. So in my head, I'm just an Until Dawn gamer.
Right. Again, maybe sort of like hitting you at that right moment in that right place.
Yeah. Maybe the Until Dawn team will engage with some interesting issues, and we'll get to talk about that.
Right. I think Kirid Zero is pointing out in chat, like Life is Strange also had that role of like that it was the introduction of queerness into AAA, right? And got a lot of PR for that. And I don't know, for everyone making smaller games, that's always been a like, really, you're gonna just sort of come along and be the first game to have a trans character in it? Are you? Like, it's, of course, it's totally untrue, unless you are like kind of like Michael Thompson. Is you're going to be a little bit like, well, all these other kinds of games don't really count because they're not really on the public radar. They're the same way.
Or Michael Thompson. Myopic Thompson, they call him now. And I feel bad. I feel like we've thrown him under the bus. So sorry, Michael.
Michael Thompson is right in a certain respect, right?
In a certain way.
In a certain way.
We call being wrong. Yeah.
So what's next, Frank?
What do we? You wanted to talk about Jonathan Blow? I think Jonathan Blow tweeted something. I was like,
oh, okay.
We don't need to talk about that. And you're like, actually, I have something to say. So let's hear.
Let's do that. Let's do that until the end. Then. All right. Now we got to get that John Blow tweet out. I think I put the link into our pile near the end. It's the last one in my first section, Robert. Oh no, Robert is blocked by Jonathan Blow.
Oh, nice. Well, there you go. That would make it safe. People say Twitter's bad, but look, Robert, the tools are working. We're
Robert Yang blocked by media. Jonathan Blow.
Yeah.
Okay. Well, so there we go. So
maybe that's
maybe that says it all. Jonathan Blow is canceling those who would cancel. He's preemptively canceling. Here, the interesting thing for game design, I have to tell you, is that John Blow is representing his new tactic, which is to refuse to speak at any conference that engages in cancel culture.
That would have him as a speaker. No, right. That's not it. He's not refusing to be at any conference that would invite him. That's not what he's doing. No. I thought it was like an Oscar Wilde. No. Okay.
Yeah, that might be very exhibit a certain type of savoir-faire. But no, it's if you invite Jonathan Blow, but you're a conference who has ever engaged in cancel culture, even years ago, and I think I know which conference he's referring to, or two of them actually, but that he will not speak there. And he also recommends this as that he thinks everyone should do this, right? That he and he's framing this all as a form of game theory. He's like, I am going to put this nuclear threat out there and try and propagate it in order to stop cancel culture. So I don't even know. There's so much that could be said about that. But the only thing I wanted to mention is this, that what strikes me is that when people say cancel culture, they refer to a phenomenon that they're usually observing in some way, that there was like somebody raised an objection about a particular speaker and they're like, hey, that guy's known for sexually harassing women, just to take an example, right? That would be like a common one. And then from the point of view of someone like John, they're saying, well, that seems wrong, that this accusation was made and that then like this person no longer got to a speaker. That's cancel culture. But on the inside, and I've only been party to like a handful of these types of decisions, it's usually like a pretty tortured decision-making process on the part of whatever event is withdrawing an invitation to a speaker. Like, I think there's this imagination from people who don't have to make these decisions that someone's like, oh, well, looks like Frank Lentz got canceled. I guess we got to pull him off of the speaker list because we have a no cancel people policy. Right. And so, but that's not how it works, right? It's actually people are like trying to figure out the right thing to do when weighing a bunch of stuff and maybe actually conducting their own inquiries and investigations into like trying to figure out, all right, how seriously should we take this? Do these accusations have credence? Can we talk to people who have had problems with this person? All sorts of stuff goes on. And then like, let's weigh the consequences and do it that way. Let's think about what the right thing is to do. What would the people who are the supporters and like the members of our community want us to do? Like all this stuff gets talked through, and then some group of people has to make like an ethical decision about whether to withdraw an invite from a speaker. So I don't know, the idea that you could make a kind of a rule, a blanket rule, like John. I'm not sure how he's even determining what would be considered cancel culture, but I think it's from his point of view. If he sees it and he knows what it is, right? He's like, I see it and I get the sense that that's cancel culture. Then I'm gonna cancel you back. It's just real. I'm sorry. It's just it's a little funny. That's all.
It is. I mean, there are certain problems that don't get improved by talking about them. And even if you think, so if you think that cancel culture is a problem, or that people are too quick to like, cancel speakers or deplatform people or whatever, like, it's not likely that you're going to, even if you think that that's a problem, right? It's not likely that you're going to make an improvement to that situation by taking a principled stand. I don't think, right? Some problems don't, like, if one of your problems is that it's too noisy in a restaurant to have a conversation, like, that's not a problem that you're going to solve by shouting at people, right? And you know what I mean? Like, there's a kind of paradoxical quality here. It's like a Streisand effect type of situation, right? Some political issues are like tug of war. You got people lined up over here, right? That are, that don't want Nazis to speak at conferences, or don't want people who have been, have been accused of sexual harassment or something to speak at conferences. And then you've got people lined up over here, maybe, I don't know, the intellectual dark web types, the free speech absolutist, right? And they're pulling at this rope. Like, is it too much? Is it not enough? Is it too much? Is it not enough? Like, you're not going to make a difference to this rope. Like, your participation in this big tug of war isn't going to make the world better for people, probably, right? You should probably just look for other places. Like, no matter what your position on this issue is, look for other ways. Like, there's even like a way of thinking about some of these issues in terms of pulling the rope sideways, rather than saying, oh, it's too much of this or too much of that. Like, how can we reframe this so that it's no longer the debate that has people lined up on either side, and it's now a different kind of question? So you could ask, okay, what is the process for deciding who gets to speak at conferences? And like, could we make that more transparent? Like, maybe everyone would want that. Like, oh, maybe every conference should have a very transparent process for deciding who gets to speak, and for people having opinions about that and participating in it. Do you know what I mean? Like, there's usually with issues like this, you should kind of like, my advice to Jonathan Blow would be to find ways to like contribute to make the world a better place, that are more likely to whatever, your perspective, more likely to actually genuinely move the ball down the field, or, this idea of kind of pulling the rope sideways. So.
Right. I think it's such a noisy problem, right? And that's why I think the noise metaphor is so funny, because just adding more opinions on what is or what does or doesn't deserve to be canceled into the mix is just so funny. Okay, that's all I had to say. I just sort of mostly wanted to laugh about the absurdity of it.
Is that it? Is there time up? Is this?
I think we're out of time, right? We should wrap it up there.
Yeah. How did we do?
Yeah,
I think that's a good
blow
note
the dust
to
off the
end on, I guess.
Yeah.
I think, it's about 2 p.m. So thanks, Naomi and Frank, for the discourse. Remember, the discourse is 1 to 2 p.m. Eastern Standard Time on Monday. What are you doing, Frank? What are you...
I have an idea.
Right now?
A light bulb?
No, I don't have an idea. Sorry, Robert.
Jesus
I apologize.
Christ. Okay, well, I'm just gonna cut to credits now. I'm the host / voice of God, Robert Yang. News co-hosts are Naomi, as well as Frank. And graphics were by Winnie Song, and captioning was by Mirror by Night of Steno Night Cart Services. Thanks everyone for joining us, and see you next week. Bye.